We are joined today by the talented Rafael Flores Jr. Rafael is an award-winning Chicano writer from DFW, Texas. He was a double finalist in the Negative Space short comic competition in 2022 with his first two short comics, The Return of Camazotz and Mother Wolf and Cubs. He studied cinematic comic book writing at the Joe Kubert School, taught by Blake Northcott, editor-in-chief of Massive Publishing. His first published work was his short comic, The Return of Camazotz, released by SDSU, Pacific Review's first ever graphic edition in 2023. Rafael has a passion for telling gothic tales with Mesoamerican mythology and themes. Rafael is the writer of Grimmcore Studios' first graphic novel, The Return of Camazotz, which will be released October 1st, 2023 on Kickstarter. The story follows twin brothers who are forced to survive the curse of an ancient Mayan vampire god in Mexico. The campaign link is in the caption of this episode, and you can sign up to the pre-launch page to be the first to get your copy when the book drops. If you are a fan of gothic horror and Mayan mythology, you do not want to miss this one out. Without further ado, here is the interview. Hello ghouls, and welcome to the Grimmcore Studios podcast, a place where we celebrate all things horror, from comic books to films, video games, and much more. Now you might be wondering, what in the 9 circles of hell is Grimmcore Studios? Well, we're glad you asked. Grimmcore Studios is a new horror comic book publisher dedicated to creating new original stories and curating genre classics for modern audiences to enjoy. I am your host, Daniel Grimm, the head ghoul in charge of this wicked little enterprise, and I'll be your guide as we start this adventure into the unknown. Hit the subscribe button and follow us to receive some of the best horror content. Hello, Rafael. Nice to have you on the show, man.
Hey man, nice to be on the show, dude. This is my first time being on any kind of podcast, so I'm excited, man.
Hey, man, you know what? All you gotta do is speak into the mic. So far, you're doing an awesome job at that. Hey, man, why don't you tell us where you're from and where you grew up?
Yeah, I'm from Dallas. I was born in Dallas, Texas. I grew up in DFW, which is like, the metroplex of North Texas. Right now I'm living in Haltom City, where I live right now, and I work in Fort Worth. So I've lived here my whole life in North Texas, and that's where I live. That's probably where I'll die. So
That's amazing, man. I'm pretty sure that Texas, with all of these different legends, that probably played some kind of influence on you growing up, right?
yeah, we have like a lot of. Texas is very Mexican lore heavy, I guess. You know what I mean? Like it's a lot of Mexicans live here, so I grew up. I am Mexican, so I grew up with those legends of like La Llorona and like Cucuys and stuff like that, and being told to like I better go to sleep or these monsters are gonna come for me. So yeah,
Right.
I grew up with that. So that's just part of my childhood. I don't know. Like I grew up in North Texas. I feel like I have family all around Texas. I have family in South Texas and East Texas, and I feel like when I would go visit those guys, they would have even crazier stories to tell me. You know what I mean? Like because they're more closer to the Hispanic side of me.
I mean, that's probably like a big influence on why you wanted to pursue horror as a creator, right? Like, when did you realize you wanted to pursue horror as a creator? Like, was there a moment where you noticed that you had an inclination towards horror over other genres?
Yeah, I've heard other like when I started getting into like making content, I've done made movies, I've done short films, I've done comic books, and when I was getting started, I kept hearing people say like the horror genre is where you want to get started. Like it's a very forgiving genre. Like it's a very loving genre. It's just like they don't care if it's good or bad. They don't care if you make mistakes. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be. It just needs to be really. You know what I mean? Like it just
Right.
as long as you tried, I think the horror fans they will accept it. I don't know. Like I think it was I don't know who it was. It might have been like James Wan and like Guillermo del Toro. How they started out in horror. I could just see like a trajectory. I could see like that there was this way to get into Hollywood. There was this way to get into comic books. You just got to start with horror. Like horror was the entryway, and it was the way that you can get in that was kind of like a safe place, which is crazy, right? Because it's horror. But like I feel like horror is the most like safe, caring like genre out there. Like if you wanted to do like a drama about like I don't know about something, you had to be very sensitive about it. You know what I mean? With horror, you're free reign to do whatever you want. You can be as sadistic, as terrifying, as terrible of a human being you want to be. Like you have the free reign to just go all balls to the wall. You know what I mean? And so I love the horror genre for that. And I grew up with the horror genre. When I was like 5 years old, I was watching horror movies that were probably like not for me yet. But like
Right.
I just grew up with that, and so it's just part of me now.
That's beautiful, man. That is beautiful. I mean, it's just so many little jewels there that I want to pursue. Just the idea of horror as a safe space. I've heard that around a lot of communities, and it's interesting. A lot of the communities that really feel drawn towards horror are communities that may be unsafe in some ways. So they find, like, for example, women. I heard a lot of women say that they love things like true crime or horror movies because they kind of see that fear that they live with reflected on the screen. So that kind of triumph in this fictional world, in this horror environment, like that, either triumph or just a reflection of what happens on a day-to-day basis, like that's powerful. And I think that horror as a safe space to explore real world fear is huge. Regarding like what you were saying about as an entry point for creatives, it's amazing when you think about all the people who started off doing horror
Yep.
and either stuck with the genre or went off to do something else. But
Yeah.
that early influence in horror, like that, those early movies, those became the foundation for what they would go on to do later on. Like Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson did horror movies first, and then he went on to do Lord of the Rings and pretty much redefined what a blockbuster could look like on the screen. And it's just, it is so cool to see that become kind of like a guideline for other creators like yourself who are starting into this creative space and making new stories and adding to the genre of horror, knowing that there is an audience out there that just wants to see creative, fun things,
Yeah.
even if they are not extremely polished, but they just want to see a try at doing good art. And I think it's amazing that you are at that point of thinking, yeah, this horror is the place to do that. Horror is the place to experiment and
Yes.
really just go all out as a creative. So I think that's fascinating. I just think that that's a wonderful thing. I heard you mention comics, and of course, Grimmcore Studios, we're a comic book publisher. And I think that I mentioned my story before of how I fell in love with comics, and I love to hear other people's stories. So how did you discover your love for comic books?
Ah, man, it's before I can even remember, man. Like, I feel like when I was a kid, like a baby, like how your parents would put you in front of a TV just so they can get some space from you and so that they could, get some alone time. They would do
Yes.
that with me. And what cartoons were around when I was a kid, when I was a baby? It was like Batman the animated series, it was Spider-Man the animated series, it was X-Men the animated series. Like those were the cartoons that I have vivid memories of as a baby, as a child, watching. And I think that was the seed that like planted the comic book love in me, the cartoons. And after that, I remember being around age 6, I got like a shoebox of comic books from one of my older cousins. I have a lot of older cousins who are into artwork and comic books and like gothic stuff, and so like I was just always surrounded by that kind of environment. And I remember at age 6 I got I got a shoebox of comic books, and it was filled with like just random 90s and 80s comic books. It had like Death of Superman. I remember there was like Legends of the Dark Knight issue 1. There was like some Spider-Man 2099 in there. I think like the first issue, and X-Men 2099. There was just a bunch of like there was like The Mask from Dark Horse, which was very like new to me because like I had never experienced this kind of like indie like or The Mask, which was more of a horror comic than it was like a funny Jim Carrey kind of movie.
Right. Yeah.
But
Originally, it was extremely gory.
Yeah, and so I just read, through these shoebox of comic books. They were just random, like random issues. I would read them, I would reread them, and I would just like read them over and over again until the pages fall out. And like I would hang up these comics on the wall, like posters, and yeah, I just fell in love with comics as soon as I had them in my hands. Like I would read them, which was like not like I don't read. Like I wasn't a kid who read. Like I didn't like to read books, but comic books were something that like I could read, and I felt like I knew instantly like this is reading. You know what I mean? Like I'm reading here, and I'm enjoying reading now. So I'm just gonna keep reading comic books, and it never stopped. I'm still reading just only comic books mostly. Like I do read some like nonfiction, and occasionally I'll try to read a book, but I really won't get that far into it. But I mostly read comic books, and I still do. I worked at a comic book store. I've never stopped reading comic books. As soon as I got them in my hands, I knew they were like this like magical thing. As soon as I turned like 6, and I got a shoebox of comic books. That was like it for me. Like my future was set basically.
Oh, that's beautiful, man. I love that superhero comics are like a almost universal gateway drug into the world of comic books and the medium of comic books. Like how you started off with like the superhero comic books and the Batman, Dark Knight, things like that, and then all of a sudden like you go into the Mask, and then that
Yeah,
becomes like an entry point into all of the other underground stuff in the
yeah,
comics landscape. And
yeah,
it's also interesting now you are in the position where you are a comic creator and
yeah,
you are coming out with this story with your first graphic novel, which is going to be published in 3 parts here at Grimmcore Studios. You are now in the position where you are a creative, where you are making your own comics and you are doing it in the horror genre. And particularly now with this new graphic novel, The Return of Camazotz. Why don't you talk to us about that? Like, what is The Return of Camazotz?
The Return of Camazotz is it's a Mayan horror story. To me, the whole idea of Camazotz was just an idea that was like it's an idea that's out there. Everybody can learn about Camazotz. It's a Mayan mythological creature or god or whatever you want to call him. But I think I learned about him through that statue of like that Batman statue. If you ever seen that, I forgot the artist's name, but he created this Batman looking Mayan like statue, and I remember seeing that, and it kind of resonated with me right away. Like I was like, "What is this? I want to know what this is." And I looked into it. I think I learned about Camazotz through that, and then it kind of stuck with me, for a while because the whole idea of a Mesoamerican bat god was very interesting to me because I'm a big Batman fan. I love bats in general. I think bats and gothic culture is very cool. So when I learned about the whole like Mayan bat god, kind of like especially like a bat god of death, like it's very cool. It's just a very cool looking and very cool idea. And so it stuck with me, it stuck with me for a while. I was working at a comic book store and here in Fort Worth, collected comics and games. And while I was working there, I remember it was like during the whole COVID was going on, like I think just to start, like everybody I remember it was like the day like where we had to like close stores and shit. And I just remember like thinking like I remember hearing about how the whole COVID started because of a bat or something like that. So I just like had a light bulb moment, where it was just like if a bat started this whole thing and like everybody's dying now, isn't this like some kind of force of Kamazat's? Like to me, like it just kind of like made sense to me. Like, and I thought like I was already trying to start a comic book company or brand or just start my own like identity as a comic book creator,
Right.
and so I was trying to figure out like what should I go under if I because especially because I was learning like if you're gonna start as a comic book creator, you got to make a brand, you got to like have a identity. And so I was trying to figure out what my brand was gonna be, and I heard about the whole COVID thing and like the how the bat started it, and I was like, you know what, why not just call it Kamazat's Comics, because nobody else has that right now. I looked it up real quick, nobody had it, so I was like, all right, I'm taking it. right away, because to me, it just made sense. Like it was just a very like obvious, like untaken idea. If you ever have that experience where it's just like, why hasn't anyone taken this and try to run with it? You know what I mean? Like this is something that's out there for everyone. Anyone can use it, can tell a Kamazot story. Like anyone. Like it's a public domain mythological character. But why hasn't anyone done it in a very like modern kind of like way? You know, like no one has done it, and I think it's just because there isn't enough. Nobody knows about it yet. You know what I mean? Like
Right, there's
there's
not
enough
enough awareness.
awareness. That's right. There's enough awareness of the character, and so the whole idea of the Return of Camazotz was kind of like, I was working at a comic book store. You know, Batman is the number one selling comic book I think of all time. Honestly, like it doesn't matter who you are. If you're a Marvel fan, you're always the guy that goes like, oh, I like Marvel, but I like Batman too, and so
Right.
I know everybody likes Batman, and so I was like, this guy, like Kamazotz is the original Batman. Like technically, like if we're talking about like time, the Mesoamerican, the Zapotecs
Right.
and the Mayans who created Kamazotz, this is a character that's been in existence for longer than Batman, and so I felt like, to me it was just like the whole idea of the return of Kamazotz was like, I'm trying to bring Kamazotz back and to the awareness of everybody here in America and South America. I'm trying to return him like to his rightful place as a god, as a figure of importance, as a figure of reverence. I just, to me it was like, okay, if everybody loves Batman, everybody loves Batman like he's a god, basically, because the whole DC pantheon, everybody says they're like modern gods, so I was like, well, we have a god. His name is Kamazotz. Let me bring him back. Let me return him, to where his rightful place as a god. And so that was the whole idea of the Return of Kamazotz and creating my whole brand around Kamazotz. It was just while I was working at a comic book store. I just had that whole idea. And it was during the whole COVID, situation. Yeah, that was probably too long of an answer.
Fascinating. I mean, like when thinking about the pandemic and how everybody was forced to be inside, I could see that at least in the kind of like the independent comic book scene, there was just this massive burst of creativity
Yes.
where everybody started coming up with new books and new series and new shows and things and podcasts. That's the year where I actually published my first comic book, Andy Starboy, and just thinking about the idea that because of the unique cultural environment that you grew up in, right? Like with all these influences of the Mexica and like the Mexican presence in Texas and in your heritage, and then looking at the mythology of it, and then being inspired also by your love for comic books and Batman and these characters. I think the combination of those factors going all into your identity as an artist and the creation of your first graphic novel, which features Camazotz as the main monster and villain, is fascinating. It's a wonderful convergence of factors that brought that about. I think that's such a fascinating story. And it's interesting to see how ideas come together for
Yeah.
people and how they are for artists in general, how we take all of these different influences and make something with it. And it all ends up kind of becoming this new thing because it is all put through one very specific filter, which is the artist, the person, that cannot be replicated by nothing else.
I need to answer your question again because I feel like I didn't answer it right. The Return of Kamazotz is a story of two twins who go to Mexico to kind of have this closure with their mother who had passed. It takes some mythology of Kamazotz as well as the Mayan hero twins, and it kind of makes this whole modern. At least I tried to make this whole modern horror story out of it. I had a lot of inspiration from other movies and other books I was reading. It started out as an idea a while back that I was working on a short comic called The Return of Camazotz. It was meant to serve as my first comic book. It was my first comic book. It was a 2-page short comic book, and it was just meant to serve as like a calling card card for what my brand was going to be, and it was Camazotz Comics, and it got a lot of attention. It even was a finalist in a Negative Space Comics short comic contest, and it got a lot of attention. And so I knew right away that like I needed to kind of focus on this idea of Camazotz and try to make this into a longer story. And that's when I met Daniel Grimm. That's whenever I met him, and he came
That's
up to me
me.
he came up to me and told me like this short comic was amazing and that I really needed to develop it into a longer story. At this point, I'd been trying to get into the comic book industry for about, I want to say, about 10 years. Just cold calling publishers, sending them pitches but without any artwork or anything. Just sending them stuff that just ideas really. But I'd been trying, I've been learning the craft of writing comic books. I've been learning the craft of writing in general, and I've just been keeping my nose to the ground. I've been like working hard at it, and Daniel Grimm was the first one to literally tell me like, you got something here. You need to develop this into a story, and I'm going to publish it for you, and I'm going to edit it for you, and that was what I needed to really do the work of making this comic book, because at that point I hadn't done the work yet. I'd done short comic books. I'd done ideas for stories. I'd done some ideas for stories with character designs in them and stuff. But I hadn't really done the work of making a comic book, at least a long form comic book. And so when he came up to me, it really invigorated me. It really made me see what I didn't see in myself. It made me like, all right, I do need to work hard at this. I have someone here telling me that I have something good. I just need to focus on it. And so that began the work of turning that short comic book into a longer, series. Originally, I think the plan was to do it like a maybe like a one shot, but like a long form one shot. But yeah, like it kind of became something else. But yeah, I think that's is that it.
No, that's amazing, man. Let me
Yeah.
tell you, I remember I saw the short comic, and I remember I was in contact with you for another thing because I was editing one of your short comics called Mother Wolf and Cubs, which was also
So,
a short comic finalist in Negative
yeah.
Space Comics that year. And I remember when I saw the short comic published, the Camazotz one, I immediately in 2 pages, just 2 pages, I was completely sold. I just needed to read this story. I needed to see a completed story. And when I decided I wanted to start my own publisher, I immediately knew that I wanted to work on this story because there was just so much potential in it. And when we worked together on the script, like you were writing the script and I was editing it and helping out with polishing it and bringing out pretty much your story to the highest potential, and all done by you, really. I was just like providing some guidance in that. It was just an honor, man. And it's just a pleasure to have been able to work with you in something so special. And I am extremely excited for people to see that coming out on Kickstarter this October through Grimmcore Studios. Like this being the first book of Grimmcore Studios, this company that I'm creating, and also being the first
My book.
graphic
Yeah.
novel that you are putting out. I think that convergence is something really special, and I am happy that we were able to work on that together, man. I'm very, very excited for people to see the completion of that process.
Yeah, and I'm very excited to be the first Grimmcore book. To me, that's an honor. It's something that I don't take lightly. Like I know that it's very important to be the first out the gate. And it's something that I'm very proud of.
Hey man, as far as first books go, I think this one is a banger, honestly. When I say that the book is like a love child of Mignola and some kind of Mexican Gothic horror beauty, this is the Return of Camazotz. It's just American Werewolf in London and Mignola all in one story with Mexica mythology. And it's just
Yeah.
chef's kiss, honestly. It's amazing.
Thanks, man.
Grimmcore Studios is a proud ambassador of Fangoria magazine, the greatest horror magazine in the world. Since 1979, Fangoria has been the leading publication when it comes to anything horror, and it's been a vital part of the genre for decades, influencing some of the most important horror creatives of our time. Every issue of Fangoria comes with exclusive articles, art, interviews, and a whole lot more that you won't be able to find anywhere else on the internet. I personally have a subscription to the magazine, and receiving a new copy in the mail is always a highlight of my week. Use code Grimmcore Studios at checkout in fangoria.com to get 20% off your purchase. I repeat, that is code Grimmcore Studios at checkout in fangoria.com, and you will get 20% off your purchase. Satisfy your thirst for blood with a Fangoria subscription today. So this is the first comic book that you produced, right? Like, this is the first time that you have developed something completely besides the short stories, but like developing a full comic book.
Yeah.
From script to line art to colors, lettering, all of the different things together. This is the first time that you've done that. What is that experience like? Like, I remember my first time making a comic, I learned a lot. Like, there was a lot of things that I didn't understand, and it just like blew my mind how intricate the process is, and how much of it is just like talking and communicating well and being like pretty much like a decent communicator and being able to manage all of these different factors. So I wanted to see what's that process like for you in this first time around. Like, what stuck out for you during this process?
Well, this process was like, so I did this short comic, which was just me and Azrael, really, and then I was kind of like the lead involved. I was the one that was writing the script and like hiring all the people to do it, and then I did the mother wolf and cubs, and that was more of a like it was more. I felt like it was more of a studio experience, where it was more of like where I had an editor, I had an artist already picked out for me, a letterer, a colorist, and I got to experience that. And so I feel like this was kind of like a mixture of the both, maybe like mostly on the independent side, but I feel like I liked working with an editor. I like that's what I've always wanted, was to work with an editor, to work with a publisher. So the whole experience of writing the Return of Camazotz, yeah, well, the writing part was really easy. I would talk to Daniel about it, and he told me to just focus on doing one page a day. At that point, I hadn't heard that before, and I had struggled to like get work done. But when he told me just focus on one page a day, I was like, well, I can do that. Anyone can do that. So so I did that, and I got a lot of work done, and I felt like it was a turning point in my career, where I was like, I just really need to focus on getting the work done, and that's like the main thing I need to focus on. And then after that, it's about editing it and polishing it. But getting the work done is the main important thing. Like finishing that script, finishing the whole. Whenever we started it, it was a graphic novel, right? So we planned it as like I think it was 64, but it ended up being like 78 or something pages. And we kind of so when I was writing it, I wrote it as like, graphic novel, but I always kept in mind that like I needed to have the page turns set in stone. I needed to have those cliffhangers on each page turn, basically. And that's something I learned from, just studying comic books and studying from, the Joe Kubert school. I always felt like in case it needed to be a series, like I think I might have like subliminally or like subconsciously like thought about that or something. Because like I felt like it came out so perfectly to where it was a perfect like 3-issue series, and it just writing it has been like really easy, real fun. It's been a very freeing experience, because before I've been very like self-conscious and very perfectionist in my work. I've always felt like I needed it to be as perfect as possible, but with working with an editor, it gives you the opportunity to kind of like do like a like or to write as best as you can, the first time, and then you give it to an editor, and they kind of really polish it up and make it even better than what you wrote the first time. And then that's what I really wanted. That's what I've always wanted. I really appreciate about working with with an editor and with a publisher. So writing it was really fun. It was really a joyous experience, and it was a very learning experience. I got to learn a lot about page turns. I got to learn a lot about writing emotion. In this comic, I'm also a student of Scott Snyder's Substack class, and he talks a lot about like emotion is the main important thing when writing a comic book. It's the through line. More than anything else, is that you got to have emotion from beginning to end, and so that always resonated with me, and I always kind of knew that at the back of my mind that stories really needed emotion in them. And so when I was writing it, it was very much just trying to bring that out. Trying to bring out the emotion, trying to bring out the drama of whatever the characters were feeling, and trying to make that the through line throughout the story. And while everything else was kind of like the decoration and the icing on the cake, it was what was the whole Camazotz and the Mayan mythology and all that. That was like the icing on the cake of this emotional journey that these two characters, the twins, were going through. And yeah, I hope it's a good journey that the readers will enjoy. It has a lot of kind of dark and depressing themes in it, but I think that hopefully that the characters and the story have told it through in a very digestible way.
That's amazing. I remember when we first started talking about developing the script for the graphic novel, that first time writing a graphic novel is so daunting because you've never written something so long as that, and it's in this different format, and it's like so different. There's actually a very fun story. The writer of The Godfather, he was a friend of Stan Lee back in the day, and Stan Lee actually gave him a shot at like pitching some comic book stories for Marvel, and he just came back to Stan Lee and said, man, I could write 100 novels and I would still not be able to complete one comic book script. So that goes to show like it is a different it's a difficult medium to writing, and it's a different language altogether. It's still like a fun little detail there that this amazing novelist and screenwriter couldn't write comic books.
Yeah.
And it's a testament to how interesting and powerful the medium is from a writing perspective. When it comes to the philosophy of writing, the different drafts, I have a philosophy when it comes to developing a script that is basically your first draft does not matter so much. The idea of the first draft is that the first draft is a vomit draft. So basically you are just dumping everything on the page. Like it doesn't matter, just whatever the story is. I mean, first of all, work on an outline so you know what your story is going to be. Don't start writing until you have an outline. That's the most important part. A good outline saves you a lot of trouble. That first draft is just putting the outline on the page, just developing the thing. And you can do that in a period of like however long it takes you. Like 1 page a day is honestly better than 1 day a month in which you write 20 pages. Because honestly, you get so much more done. Like more often than not, you'll start off with writing 1 page and then you will want to do more. So you instead of doing just 1 page, you end up doing like 2, 3, 5, however many pages you do. And if someday you just don't feel like doing that, just doing 1 page is extremely doable. And it doesn't have to be good. Your first draft will never be good. Never. It's always going to have a lot of issues. That's why you have several drafts. That's when an editor really helps, because an editor goes in, looks at that first draft, and basically polishes the draft with the supervision of the writer and works on it to make it as clean as possible, taking out unnecessary scenes, fixing logical mistakes or fixing it dialogue, things like that. But that first draft, I feel like a lot of people don't give writing a try because they are intimidated by the blank page, and they are intimidated by the feeling that, well, how am I going to fill this blank page? That idea that first draft does not have to be good, doesn't have to have high quality, it just has to be done. And the idea that you can write something just a page a day, I think that that's something that really makes a difference mentally when you are pursuing writing. For me personally, I'm a big perfectionist. That's the editor side in me. I'm a perfectionist, so I want my first draft to be as good as possible, but also recognizing that no, your first draft will be terrible, and if you try and edit it as you go, it's going to take you 3 years hours to finish 20 pages.
Yeah.
Which is the case that a lot of people find themselves in. So I recommend it to anybody that's listening that's looking into pursuing writing. 1 page a day. Your first draft doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to be good. It just has to be done. You can always edit a bad page, but you can't ever edit a blank page. When discussing all the level of feeling that you put into this story, shout out to Scott Snyder, first of all. He's one of my favorite writers in comics. He's one of the best horror comic people out there. I haven't read too much of his superhero stuff, but his horror stuff is just sublime. And his ideas about emotion is so correct. Like stories are all about emotion, are all about what an emotion. There is an action that triggers an emotion in response, and that emotion is manifested through action, and that action is going to have an emotional response. So that's basically what a story is. A story is all about emotion manifesting in action. When you're able to do that, and I think you did that wonderfully with the Return of Camazotz, and people are going to be able to see that. You really did a good job with that, and you really get us to be invested in the characters and in the journey of the characters. When all the gore and murder and mayhem starts happening, we care. And it's not just, okay, these people get, suffer and go through a lot of stuff, and nobody really cares about them.
It's not a horror movie where you root for the villain. It's a horror movie where you root for the hero.
Yes, exactly. You want these people to survive. It's not, yeah, exactly. It's not Friday the 13th. If you had one main thing that you want people to get out of the Return of Camazotz, what would that be?
I think the one main thing is that, and I think it's the theme of the story. And when I wrote the story, I'm not one that writes with a theme in mind. I kind of try to write with just the characters in mind, and I try to write a very human story of like just action and reaction. But every time I write a story, there is always some kind of nugget in there at the end after I'm done that I can like pull out and like, yeah, this is probably what the story was about. And when I was writing it, and I didn't really even think about it, I was just writing it at the time. And I think the story ultimately is just about compassion for the dead, compassion for people that are gone. We shouldn't have hate in our hearts for anyone that has left this earth. I feel like once they are gone, I understand, different situations, different people. But when it comes to our loved ones, the people that took care of us, the people that, were there for us, when they're gone, I feel like we need to have some kind of respect for them. And just because that they were there for us when we were vulnerable, they were there for us when we were children, when we couldn't take care of ourselves. And that's the role of a mother, is to take care of children who are or can't take care of themselves. The character Victor has some demons that he's dealing with. He has some issues that he's got to work out with, and he has some hate in his heart, and that he needs to kind of heal. And that's what the whole story is about. It's about healing that hate, healing that anger, healing, having more compassion for the people who have hurt you, and accepting. I don't know. It's about forgiving not only the people who have hurt you, but forgiving yourself for having the feelings of that hate towards the people who have hurt you.
That's beautiful, brother. That's beautiful. That's a wonderful, wonderful message that everybody needs to hear. That's wonderful, man. All right, we are going to start a quick lightning round of questions. So right now we are going to start a lightning round of questions inspired by one of my personal interviewing idols, James Lipton from the Actor Studio. I grew up watching that man. So I figured, why not make a questionnaire for horror creators that is similar to that questionnaire? So let's have a little fun with just I'm going to ask you a question, and you just have to answer like the first thing that comes into your mind. Just go with it. Don't overthink it. Just have fun with it. You ready?
Okay. Yeah.
All right. First question: Dracula or Frankenstein?
Even though I'm all about the bats, I gotta go with Frankenstein just because I feel like he's just a cooler character.
Really? I thought for sure that you would go with Dracula, but I love Frankenstein. I'm a Frankenstein guy myself, so that's good. We're off to a good start. If the zombie apocalypse broke out, what one movie, comic, or book would you carry with you?
I'd probably carry The Walking Dead because that's like the best graphic novel series of zombies out there. I do have an escape plan of surviving the zombies. Let me just share that real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
You just got to get an apartment building. You got to get the top floor of the apartment building, and you got to tear down the stairs, and you just got to build like ropes and shit to like go down and up the stairs so you can go get food and shit. But yeah, that was my survival plan of a zombie apocalypse if it happens.
I don't even have a survival plan. I know I'm gonna die in the first day. I am not built for the apocalypse. But for all of you guys who do have hope of surviving the zombie apocalypse, please do take notes. On that same vein of surviving, out of all horror movie monsters and slashers, which would you think you have the better chance of surviving, and why?
I'm gonna I'm gonna go with Chucky from Child's Play. Just because he's a little doll. You just gotta run away from him, and he will never fall. Because like he's got those tiny legs, you know, and if he does come up to you, just kick him. And that's what I never understood about the Child's Play franchise was that no one ever just kicked him, just punted his ass like 30 meters away. You know what I mean?
Hey man, you know what? That's a very solid point. Not gonna lie, that's an extremely solid point. Chucky it is. If you were the last survivor in a horror movie, what would your one-liner be?
Oh my god, one-liner?
Yeah.
All right, if I was the last survivor, you got to talk about the people that have died, all right?
Yeah.
So I would probably be like, I told y'all. That's my character. That would be my character in the movie. Would be the guy that was like, I told y'all not to do this stuff. I told y'all not to go out there in the woods. I told y'all not to go have sex out in the cabin out there. I told y'all not to do that, but they didn't want to listen to me, and so that's why I would be the last survivor.
The told you so guy. The classic survivor. There should be more told you so people at the end of horror movies. Like just the final girl has normally been the person who was like, "What are y'all on? Like, please stop.
Mm-hmm.
You're inviting death." So I think that tracks for sure. All right, man. This was a wonderful interview. We had a great time. Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. It's a pleasure to have you here. One more time, let us know the Return of Camazotz.
Yeah, the Return of Camazotz. It's a Mayan modern horror story. It's if you like Mayan mythology, if you like horror stories, you're gonna love this book. That's all you gotta do. If you like that kind of stuff, then you're gonna have a good time. Comes out this October. Please support it. We hope that y'all enjoy it, and we look forward to bringing y'all more after it comes out.
All right, y'all, you heard it here first. It's The Return of Camazotz, the new graphic novel from Grimmcore Studios, the new home of horror. We are bringing gore. We're bringing gothic Mayan vibes. We're bringing mythology. We're bringing the human experience, all performed in art. So come support this beautiful, badass, monstrous horror graphic novel that is going to be dropping this Halloween season on Kickstarter through Grimmcore Studios. We say goodbye to our friend Rafael Flores Jr. and you guys have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful spooky evening. Well, ghouls, thank you for listening to this episode of the Grimmcore Studios podcast. If you enjoyed listening to it, hit that like button and subscribe. That will help us immensely in keeping the show going and creating original horror stories for you to enjoy. If you'd like to stay in touch with us, follow our social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Grimmcore Studios. That is GRIMMCORE Studios. Speaking of Facebook, we got a Facebook group called the Grimmcore Horror Social Club, where we share free and legal horror movies every Friday, and where you'll get to interact with all the Grimmcore creators and other horror fans. It's a really nice time. We also have a free monthly email newsletter where we share horror news, book reviews, movie recommendations, exclusive interviews that you won't get on this podcast, and more importantly, free vintage horror comics from the 1950s. Trust me, they're a trip. They're so much fun. Now, all links are in the caption for this episode. Go through them, enjoy it. That is all for now, ghouls. Now stay safe, stay spooky, and enjoy the fear. Until next time.